All right, we're going to get started. We got a big agenda in front of us. We got a full day, and of course we have the Lawmaker Appreciation Dinner tonight, and we've got the Attorney General Forum starting today between the pine and the sagebrush. Some of you have seen Between Two Ferns. This is a little bit of a takeoff of that, perhaps. It'll be more serious than that. But welcome to the Montana Chamber of Commerce Business Days at the Capitol. It's an honor to have you here. My name is Todd O'Hare, and I'm the President and CEO of the Montana Chamber of Commerce. I started in this role in May of this year, and so I look forward to working with all of you and meeting those of you that I haven't had a chance to meet yet, and look forward to an exciting year in front of us. You know, in 2002 was when the Montana Chamber of Commerce started holding these business days at the Capitol on an annual basis rather than on a biennial basis. And I think it was because there was a realization that business issues don't just arise during legislative years. They occur throughout the entire year. And so we started having these business days at the Capitol on an annual basis. And so now, this is our 20th anniversary of Business Days at the Capitol, our platinum year, if you will. And it has grown to be one of the signature anchor events for the Montana Chamber of Commerce and probably one of the biggest networking opportunities in the state of Montana. And of course, there's no way we could do this without a tremendous amount of help and support from a variety of folks. And I want to start by thanking our area chambers of commerce. We've got a lot of those folks who assist us in getting the word out, and a number of them are here, and so I want to thank our area chambers, the lawmakers, and the candidates who are in attendance here today, and of course the business community, because the business community has stepped up in a large way in order to support this sort of an event on an annual basis. And so to that end, it's important that we take a minute and make sure we recognize those businesses that have been the big sponsors and the big supporters of this, most of whom have been big supporters of this on an annual basis. So I want to thank our platinum level sponsors, and when you see these folks, make sure you thank them for the meals that we get to have and the venue and the entire program that we've put together here today. And so I want to start with Boeing. Thank you, Boeing, Boeing here in Helena as a platinum sponsor. Northwestern Energy, Montana State Fund has always been a great supporter of the Montana Chamber of Commerce. First Interstate Bank, Shordare Children's Hospital. I see Craig is here. Thank you, Craig, for your support of the Montana Chamber of Commerce and the business days at the Capitol. Washington Companies, Pacific Source Health Plans, and Blue Cross Blue Shield. Moving on quickly to our gold level sponsors, we got Charter Communications, the Big Sky Chamber of Commerce. Thank you, Candace. And of course, we've got Microsoft and Town Pump. Other sponsors at the silver level include Valley Bank of Helena, VisionNet. VisionNet seems like they sponsor practically everything that the Montana Chamber of Commerce does, and we want to thank VisionNet for that. Republic Services, Montana Bankers Association, thank you, Carrie Hegerberg, for your support of the Montana Chamber of Commerce. The University of Montana, Taylor Luther Group, Crowley Fleck, and Montana State University. Our bronze level sponsors, Tohall. Tohall has been a great sponsor of the Montana Business Days at the Capitol out of Belgrade. Thank you, Kim. Kim is here. Payne West Insurance, Weyerhaeuser, Montana Hydraulics, Morrison Merrily, Billings Clinic, and Siboney Stillwater all are coming in at the bronze level. And so wrapping it up, and certainly not least, are our copper level sponsors, which include Great Falls College, MSU, Susan Wolf, who is also on the board of directors for the Montana Chamber of Commerce, Midland Claims Service Incorporated and Industrial Injury Claims, Montana Retirement Choices, UBS, and Montana's Credit Union. So please join me in thanking them for their support of Montana Business Days at the Capitol. I want to also take just a moment to acknowledge the board of directors that we have here today. We've got a lot of our board members from both our Chamber of Commerce board and from the foundation board. These folks serve on a volunteer basis, travel from across the state for a variety of meetings, and we ask a lot of them in between events like this. And so I want to thank them for representing the business community on issues that are most important to the business community. And so if you are a member of the Montana Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors or the Foundation Board, would you please stand so we can thank you for your service to the Montana business community? So I need to start real briefly here by introducing the rest of the staff at the Montana Chamber of Commerce. And it's important for me to introduce the rest of my team because we are a team and we're all here on behalf of the business community, and I'm proud to work with these folks, and none of this could happen without all of their work. And so I want to start with Dee Durand, and Dee may be out at the front desk, but Dee Durand, I think you all know Dee. I know she knows all of you. What you probably don't know is that Dee has been with the Montana Chamber of Commerce for 35 years. Which is a remarkable testament of commitment to this organization. So I want to thank Dee Durand. She does about everything that we can ask for her around the office, and so I want to thank Dee. Stacy Dorrington is our events coordinator, so all the logistics that go into putting this on and the tables and then recruiting sponsors, Stacy does all of that. And then when she's not doing that, she's putting together the finances and the books for the Montana Chamber of Commerce, another big job, and so I couldn't do it without Stacy. Bridger Malum is our Director of Government Affairs. Bridger's right here in the front row here, and so Bridger takes lead on behalf of the Montana Chamber of Commerce and the business community every year during the legislative session, and then during the interim, years like this, you know, he's busy in the rulemaking process that agencies implement after they pass legislation, and very busy on the interim committees. And Kimberly Seligman, who is new to the Montana Chamber, she started in October. Is Kimberly here? Where's she at? There she is. Kimberly's over here. She's our membership manager, and she does some communications work for us. And one of the things that we're working really hard on is ramping up our communications efforts so that our members are getting the information that they want in a way that they want it delivered to them. And so I want to thank Kimberly for her work and her dedication to the organization as well. And finally, Matt Olson, who also joined the chamber in October. Matt's in the back of the room back there. Matt is heading up our Envision work, making sure that those of you that are investing in our Envision 2026 plan are getting the information and the communications and the service that you deserve from that. And then he's also heading up our workforce development piece, which we're putting some extra focus on workforce development. Matt is doing some extra work on the workforce development piece. So I wanted to introduce those folks because, as I said, you know, it takes a team, and we all work together, and we work together well, and it takes an entire team to be able to put these sort of events together along with the day-to-day operations of the organization. You know, when I started at the chamber in May, it didn't take me long to kind of figure out that I'm going to have to figure out a way to prioritize my time, because working for an organization as big as the Montana Chamber of Commerce that represents such a diverse set of businesses from across the state. You know, we have everything from traditional natural resource industries that belong to the chamber, like mining and timber, to the new emerging economy like high-tech and mid to small manufacturing companies, small mom and pop organizations and restaurants. It's easy with that sort of diversity to get pulled in too many directions and be spread too thin, and not be able to do anything of consequence on any one particular item. And so we needed to focus what our energies were. And one of the things that I realized as I was getting my feet on the ground is that there was one issue that I was running into no matter where I went and what business I talked to, regardless of what industry sector they were in, and that was workforce development. Every business in the state of Montana, I think, is struggling with how they're going to fill their workforce, not only today, but especially going into tomorrow. And that's whether you are in the mining industry, or whether you're in high tech, or whether you're trying to find servers to work at your restaurant. Everybody seems to be struggling with the same thing. And so tomorrow, you're going to see that we're putting some additional focus on workforce development. Matt Olson is going to showcase the results of a survey that we did, partnering with other major associations and area chambers of commerce to get as much feedback as we could from employers to identify in the employer's mind what were the top issues facing them as they try to recruit and retain a quality workforce. And so make sure you stick around for that tomorrow. And not only are we going to be highlighting what was identified as the challenges by our business community, but we're also going to start touching on what we think are some of the possible solutions. We think that one of the great roles of the Montana Chamber of Commerce is being able to identify programs and efforts that are working and look for ways that we can support those or scale them up or emulate them in cases that it might be necessary. So we're going to be shining a lot of spotlight on workforce development going forward. We're going to continue to work on tax reform and infrastructure. And asking the question with regard to tax structure is the tax structure that we have today in Montana, one is based largely upon heavy equipment and bricks and mortar, is that a tax structure that's appropriate for the new economy that we see? An economy that is increasingly a service-oriented economy and one that is increasingly in the high-tech sector of our economy. And so we need to start asking those questions. Is this tax structure that we have today current for what we see emerging in our economy? And when it comes to infrastructure, we're going to continue to focus on infrastructure. Because not only is it important to have a world-class infrastructure in terms of bridges and roads, not only so that we can get our goods and products out of the state, but it's also going to be critical as we try to recruit businesses and employees, particularly the talent, to Montana to meet the workforce needs that we have. So infrastructure is going to continue to be a big issue. And you're going to see tomorrow that the tax panel that we have is going to dive into our changing economy and looking at how other states may be positioning themselves to take advantage of the changing economy that they see in their state. 2020 is going to be a big election year for the state of Montana. And outcomes of the 2020 election are going to have direct impacts on every business in the state. Legislators and the new governor, regardless of what the outcome of the next election is going to be, we will have a new governor. And they will be making decisions related to workforce development, taxes, regulations, and infrastructure. And you're going to see over the course of the next day that the Montana Chamber of Commerce is exploring new and innovative ways to engage in the 2020 election cycle. And we're going to start today with the Attorney General Forum, where we're going to hear from all 4 candidates running for Attorney General. It's important that the Montana Chamber of Commerce positions itself to work with whoever the next governor is, regardless of which party controls the legislature. Like last year, again in 2021, we'll be working to solve the art of the possible. We work with candidates and elected officials on issues that are most important to the Montana business community. I think a major strength of the Montana Chamber of Commerce is that of a convener, bringing together business leaders and elected officials and candidates, government agencies to solve challenges and explore growth opportunities. And we're going to continue to build on that strength through our election engagement and through all of the events that we host throughout the year. Business Days at the Capitol, I think, is a great example of that convener role that the Montana Chamber hosts. Because you'll see here over the next 2 days that there's big business and small business and government officials and candidates for office, the university system, K through 12, all here to network and learn from each other and build relationships. So 2020 is going to be a full and an exciting year for the Montana Chamber of Commerce and for the business community. And for those of you that are already members, I want to thank you for being a member. We look forward to working with you, and I want to encourage you to contact me or any one of the rest of us that are on the Montana Chamber staff to make sure that we are representing the issues that are most important to you. If you don't happen to be a member, we'd love to have you join, because the bigger our membership is, the stronger the voice and the more advocacy that we have. And with that, I would like to now introduce the chairman of the Montana Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors, Mr. Richard Miltenberger. Richard?
Thank you, Todd. It's been great working with Todd. Todd joined us, was it July? Todd? May. He's been working since July, but he joined us in May. And after 20 years, Webb Brown left big shoes to fill. And after his retirement last year, after 20 years, we did a comprehensive search, and we're delighted to bring Todd on board. We do have a survey at the end of the meeting. And so he is still on probation until the end, I guess, till the end of May. So please fill out your surveys. But in all seriousness, it's been terrific to see the energy and some of the new ideas that we've seen in the past several months. This is a great time to be part of this organization. The Montana Chamber has taken a bold step a few years ago with the introduction of Envision 2026. You'll hear more about that tomorrow, but we are making an enormous effort, and it's having real results to change the business climate of Montana. Part of this is just simply recognizing that business for too long has been looked at as kind of a cash cow. Business is there to fund state and local government, or maybe business is there to help fund local nonprofits. And while we're all pleased to do that, I think there's a greater recognition, and we're going to build on that greater recognition, that business is a good in itself, that America's employers and Montana's employers provide a social fabric for their employees, training for employees, a base of stability that helps the whole social and civic fabric of our state. So it's a fun time to be part of an organization that is part of that. I have two things I was going to say. One was what I just mentioned about 2026 and really building that business climate. The other thing I wanted to mention, and it was alluded to by Todd, but after quite a bit of debate, the board of the chamber has decided that we are going to change and really end our traditional political endorsement process. We feel that it's been a bit paternalistic because we have a board of 25 people and a membership of several hundred businesses, and those 25 will then make endorsements to the rest of the membership. With the electronic media that are at our disposal, we're instead going to try and bring more of what we've gotten to experience with political interaction with folks running for office and bring that out to our membership, bring it to the business community, and let business leaders make up their own minds about who they would like to support instead of us making a firm endorsement. This does not represent a retreat from political activity by the chamber. I would say the opposite. We're going to reemphasize our political action committee and begin to allow businesses to fund folks that are supportive of their interests in the political process. So the political action committee, not only does it not go away, there'll be greater emphasis. So keep hold of your checkbook. We will be coming to you for donations to that political action committee. In addition to that, we want to have more of the activities like we're about to start here, where we bring forums where people that are running for office can put themselves forth and put their ideas forth before our entire membership and indeed in front of the entire business community in Montana. So this is by no means a retreat from political activity. We consider it to be a re-engagement at a membership level as opposed to an endorsement that kind of comes on from on high. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce David Bell. David, you can stand up and start walking forward. David is the president and CEO of ALPS. If you haven't heard of ALPS, they're a really cool organization based out of Missoula that manages insurance companies and is an insurance company, provides liability insurance for attorneys around the country. They're well known all over the country. And he also serves as the chair of the Montana Justice Coalition. So the Montana Justice Coalition is the Montana Chamber arm that looks at and encourages judicial reform in Montana. And as chairman, he's also going to be the perfect fit to introduce our first candidate forum. So please welcome David Bell.
Thank you, Richard. And, in addition to your role in the chamber, we're so fortunate in Montana to have somebody with your years and depth of knowledge in the healthcare industry. And I really appreciate you giving that introduction. This is an exciting time to be between the sagebrush and the pine, symbolically representing the issues that we're going to wrestle with that span from the eastern to the western sides of our great state. We have a great forum debate scheduled here today, and in my role at ALPS, where we deal in the legal system, we're the largest direct legal malpractice insurance company in the country, and we happen to be based here in Missoula, but we operate in 47 states, and so we are engaged in these types of issues all around the country. And in our legal system, it draws interest from beyond our state borders. In fact, businesses often research state legal climates before committing investments, seeking common sense leadership from elected officials on tort litigation and other policies. Organizations like the U.S. Chamber's Institute for Legal Reform identify patterns in states and report on them accordingly. In its latest ranking of our state legal climates, Montana came in at a surprising 7th best. This is a major improvement over the last decade. I can remember not too many years ago when we were 48th. Frankly, 7th is a bit of a head scratcher for us. Dealing in many states, including Montana, I don't know that we necessarily see it that way, but they are ranked 7th. And this is a major improvement, and we now turn to the really important 2020 election and learn who might carry that momentum going forward. A just legal climate for individuals and business underscores the importance of the Attorney General position in our state. And this is precisely why the Montana Chamber is hosting today's forum, to help you make an informed decision about which of these 4 highly qualified individuals best reflects your values for this office. Now, without further ado, let's meet the candidates. I'll refer you to the event program for their complete biographies. We did invite them to offer, within a certain character limitation, their own bios. So this is what each of these candidates would like you to know most about them, but their accomplishments go beyond this description, so please do refer to their bios. First, John Bennion is the Chief Deputy Attorney General for the state of Montana. Having worked under Attorney General Tim Fox since 2013, he oversees the Legal Services Division in the Montana Department of Justice. John has appeared numerous times before the Montana Supreme Court, as well as federal court, on a variety of constitutional, criminal appellate, natural resource, and business law cases. He has spearheaded key initiatives in the DOJ and advanced its priorities in the legislature. Born and raised in Billings, John got his bachelor's degree and law degree from the University of Montana. He lives in Clancy with his wife, Jessie, and son, Jack. Welcome, John. Next, Kimberly Dudik is a legislator serving the House District 94 in Missoula. During her 4 terms in the House, Kim championed legislation that reformed public safety, protected vulnerable populations, and improved criminal justice. She previously enforced Montana law as Assistant Attorney General and Deputy County Attorney. Born and raised in Montana, Kim attended the Montana State University, graduating with a Bachelor's of Science in Nursing. She later attended the University of Montana School of Law and Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Kim is married and has 4 children, raising them to enjoy Montana outdoors and the traditions that she values. Welcome, Kim. Next, Ralph Graybill. Ralph is the Chief Legal Counsel to Montana Governor Steve Bullock. In that role, Ralph helps oversee the legal affairs for 13 state agencies, represents the governor in state and federal court, and manages the governor's disaster and emergency response portfolio. Before his leadership role with the state, Ralph worked in private practice, representing small and medium-sized businesses in commercial litigation for one of the nation's leading law firms. Ralph is a 5th-generation Montana from Great Falls and a graduate of the Yale Law School, Columbia University, and Oxford, where he studied as a Rhodes Scholar. He resides in Helena with his wife, Marissa, and daughter Guinevere. Welcome. And finally, Austin Knudsen is elected the Roosevelt County Attorney in 2018, having spent nearly a decade in private practice. He also represented Eastern Montana in the House of Representatives for 8 years. Austin was elected by his legislative peers to serve as House Speaker in the 2015 and 2017 sessions, and he remains the only individual to have served in this role twice since term limits were imposed. A 5th-generation Montanan, Austin grew up on his family farm and ranch outside of Culbertson. He received his undergraduate degree from Montana State University, Bozeman, and his law degree from the University of Montana. He and his wife, Christy, have 3 children. Welcome, Austin. Okay, we'll begin the forum with a 2-minute opening remarks. I'll ask the candidates to draw from this highly sophisticated algorithmic program that will just take one of those and pass it down. All right. So we'll open up with a 2-minute opening remarks from each candidate. I will then kick off the discussion with a series of questions. Following that, we'll engage you, the audience, by inviting your questions to these guests. We'll wrap things up with a 1-minute close from each of the candidates. The candidates were not provided the questions in advance, and the numbers that they just drew are just 1 through 4. That'll dictate the first question goes, and then we'll follow with number 2 being first the next time, so on and so forth. So this will be nothing if not fair and candid. And so with that, John, the floor is yours to open it up.
All right. Thank you all. John Bennion, and I'm very happy to see a lot of familiar faces here. And it's great to have this kind of a forum. This is the first time that we've all been together and been able to answer questions that are important to this organization and to the state. I'm running for Attorney General because we need to continue to have somebody in the office that provides leadership on critical public safety issues, fights government overreach, stands up for Montana's economic interests, and protects the most vulnerable in our society. A lot of you know my background. You heard a little bit about my background. I've never run for office before. I'm not a career politician, and that's not what this office needs. The office needs somebody that's going to have the right kind of experience, the right judgment, the right work ethic, and the record of accomplishment to make sure that you can carry out the important mission of the Department of Justice. As I go around campaigning around the state, a lot of people don't know about the mission of the Department of Justice. What is the role of the Attorney General? Obviously, people know that you have to be an attorney to be the Attorney General. But what I talk about are a couple of different things. You are the state's top lawyer. You are, in many ways, the state's top cop, providing leadership on public safety issues. You're a member of the Land Board. You're also a manager of an organization of more than 800 employees with 8 different divisions with a diverse mission spread across the state. So having a manager at that role is very important. But what I also tell people is the Attorney General can't solve everyone's problems. And the government can't solve everyone's problems, nor should it even try. But what it can do is if you get the right people in office, make sure that you set the right priorities and use the limited staff, budget, and authority that you have to tackle some of the state's biggest problems. And I look forward to talking more about those today. I think there's a lot that we can cover today. I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to talk about those things that are important to the business community. And so I would just want to thank you again for having us here and letting us answer your questions. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Kim.
Can you hear me? All right, good. Light wasn't on. I'm running for Attorney General because Montana needs a proven advocate who can deliver real results that matter to our lives. We need someone who has a record of bringing all Montanans together and working on important issues like our public safety, improving things that have been ignored for too long, like Montana's meth problem, our human trafficking problem, and our child abuse problem. We need an advocate who's going to ensure that our outdoor heritage and our public lands stay in our public hands and that we can use them for future generations and for now. And we also need somebody who's going to be able to bring people forward to find common solutions to the problems we're facing. Now, you heard a little about my background. I bring a unique characteristics to this office that none of the other candidates do. I sit on one of our local hospital boards right now. It was where I actually had my first job as a nurse. I also have been a deputy county attorney enforcing our laws, helping people in their most dire situations, and assistant attorney general. But then I've also been a substitute judge enforcing our laws, meting out justice. And I've been a reformer in our legislature for issues that have been plaguing our state for too long. But some of the things that are more relevant to you as a business are some of the things that we've been able to get done, like cutting the business equipment tax. But more importantly, we heard about our workforce development, and that's something that I've focused on. There's a program that you'll be hearing about soon through the Department of Labor called the Montana Earn Program. and that's for Montana Employment Advancement Right Now. It's an industry-led initiative that we seeded with $45,000 for businesses like you to apply for to meet your unmet workforce needs when you partner with some sort of school and some sort of government. So it's that kind of initiative and bringing people together and finding solutions that I've been an expert in, really. It's a hallmark of my approach to what I've done in public service. It is a hallmark of what I'll do as your Attorney General. The three things I think we need to do are connect with each other, communicate, collaborate, and then create solutions. These are solutions that we need to bring our state forward, to have a vibrant workforce that will help our state develop. And I look forward to talking with you more and seeing you across the state this next year. Thanks.
Thanks, Kim.
Good afternoon. My name is Raph Graybill. There's actually no L. Oh. But my iPhone does the same thing, so I don't blame you for that.
You can note that on your survey as well, although I don't think I'm on probation.
Thank you for having me here today and the rest of the candidates. As John mentioned, it's not common that all four of us get up on a stage together and answer questions about why we're running and really the issues that matter to you. I want to challenge this audience in particular, which I think is a sophisticated audience, to resist the temptation to look at this job like another political job. When you vote for AG, you're not going to vote for a legislator or a governor. You're really hiring a lawyer. And the AG in our Constitution is our state's chief legal officer. And so what I think that means is you're going to ask a different series of questions when thinking about who your AG candidate is than you might for legislator. And you're going to hear from a lot of great candidates this cycle on a lot of great ideas. But when it comes to this office, I think we have to constrain ourselves to what does the AG actually do? Is this a lawyer that I want to hire? And when you're hiring a lawyer, as I know a lot of you have, look at, see Washington Companies, Town Pump, State Fund, you folks hire lawyers. You ask a different set of questions. You ask questions like, can this person do the work? Is the person I'm hiring actually going to do the work themselves? What's their record on the big cases when it comes to court? Does this person share my values? And when I'm not looking, when I'm busy with my day-to-day life, are they out there working for me? I want to tell you a quick story about the kind of lawyer that I am, the kind of work that I do. The generation of kids in high school right now, and in middle school right now, was the first generation in American history with a genuine chance of being tobacco-free. But now, 60% of Montana high schoolers use e-cigarettes. 30% of middle schoolers in Montana use e-cigarettes. If you go back to last summer, you remember there was this horrible outbreak of pulmonary injuries across the country, including in Montana. We had 5 people get sick and 1 teenager die. Well, this is a story about how the government worked with private sector partners, including folks in this room like Town Pump, to do the right thing. We took action in the governor's office and we said we ought to pause selling flavored e-cigarettes in Montana. And where my job came in is when that was challenged in the courts, we had 10 days to build a case, 10 days to put together witnesses, to go to court, and to make a difference for kids who were truly suffering in our state. And it was my job to put that case together. And when we did that case, we achieved a ruling that set a national precedent. And we didn't do it alone. Retailers like Walmart, like CVS, and like Town Pump worked with us every step of the way to make sure that our businesses in Montana were doing the right thing. They wanted to do that. Now, those are the kinds of cases that I work on. And those are the kinds of cases I want to continue to work on as your Attorney General. And I want to continue to work on them in a way that includes private sector partners. That's why I'm running, and I'm really excited to meet all of you today to share my values and my vision for this office. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Austin.
Thank you all and good morning. As you've heard, my name's Austin Knudsen. I'm the current county attorney in Roosevelt County. I look around and see a lot of familiar faces. Thank you to the Chamber for having me here today. I'm going to keep this fairly brief here so we can get into the meat and potatoes here. I just want to introduce myself a little more. I think as you get in the Attorney General's race, we have to look at experience. And I think particularly for this crowd, experience is important. And you folks need to look at the candidates and see what kind of life experience and business experience do the candidates bring to bear. And I'm the candidate up here who's got 10 years of private practice experience. Not only private practice in law, representing farmers, ranchers, individuals, small businesses, in civil court doing all kinds of different things. I've actually also owned my own business. I had my own private law firm for 5 years, ran it successfully before I decided to run for county attorney, which I'm doing now. So this is another experience that I think you have to look at from business people's standpoint. You've got a candidate right here in me who's actually owned a business, signed the fronts of checks, not the backs of them, and has actually had to do those business decisions that you all have to make every day. I'm prosecuting now, and this is the biggest reason I'm running for county attorney. We have got a tremendous, tremendous methamphetamine problem in this state that's leading to a huge increase in violent crime in the state. And I know as business owners, this is something that's concerning, whether you're hiring someone or whether you're having to deal with a crime issue and crime problems in your communities. This is something that's really, really coming to the forefront in the state, and I think it's important that you have an attorney general who's actually set foot in the courtroom and prosecuted criminals before. And this is what I do every day. As soon as I'm done here today, I'm going to have to turn around and get back to Roosevelt County because I've got a trial in 2 days. I've got 2 trials next week. This is what I'm doing. I'm in the courtroom prosecuting criminals in this state. Violent crime in Montana has increased 30% in the last 5 years. Those aren't my stats. Those are the Montana Board of Crime Control stats. And this is all being driven by the methamphetamine problem and the cartels. This is the Mexican cartels who are here in Montana peddling this poison into our communities. We need an attorney general who's actually dealt with this problem and who's going to be aggressive. I'm the guy who's going to come in here and be looking out for the Montanans, the taxpayers, and the business people, and not the bureaucracy here in Helena. So, looking forward to a good discussion here today. Thanks again for having me.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Austin. And just from a formatting perspective, we'll go through the questions. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes to answer the question. I'll apologize to candidates in advance that I'll have to be the enforcer if you kind of creep up towards that time. And who drew number 1? Kim. Okay, who drew number 2? All right, Austin. Number 3. All right, John. And Raph, you're 4. Okay. So we'll run through, and we tried as we were formulating these questions, which I mentioned were not provided to the candidates in advance. Not going to ask them why they're running for office, because I have no doubt that they'll say very heartfelt and genuine sentiments like serving and giving back, but it's also rather predictable in a political race. So we're going to try to stick to questions that are somewhat pointed and that tease out candidates' perspectives and hopefully tease away perspectives that might differentiate the opinions and perspectives of one candidate from another. So that's my goal. Hopefully we'll be able to accomplish that. And with it, let's get underway. Kim drew the first question. So Kim will answer this, and then the other 3 can follow up with their answers to the same question. Kim, what do you see as the role of the Montana Supreme Court in establishing public policy? And perhaps, just as or more important, do you have any specific ideas about reform?
I don't have any specific ideas about reforming our Supreme Court. I don't think that's the role of the Attorney General. I think the Attorney General is supposed to enforce our laws in our state and protect citizens' rights. So as far as ideas of reform go for the Supreme Court, no. I would like to see it less partisan, but that I think comes into money being in campaigns and influence of outside money groups. And that's something I would fight against as Attorney General. And as far as the role of the Supreme Court, it is in interpreting the law. Sometimes that does come into setting public policy if there are conflicts in the law. But I believe that the Supreme Court in Montana that we have needs to be predictable so that businesses especially know what to expect. I know, having been a litigator in my own practice, I also clerked for the Supreme Court, that some people believe that it is malpractice not to appeal something to the Supreme Court because you never know what results you will get. And I don't think that that's the kind of Supreme Court we want in our state. I don't know that that is the Supreme Court we have, but I think that it should be consistent and people should be able to know what to expect, and they just need to enforce the law in our state.
Thank you, Kim. Austin.
I don't think there's any question that we've got a fairly activist Montana Supreme Court. I think any business person in here who spent any time in the courtroom or had to appeal something to the Montana Supreme Court would agree with that sentiment. I can tell you as a private practitioner in the civil field for 10 years, I think we've absolutely got a problem with partisanship and activism on the Montana Supreme Court. I actually have to agree with my colleague Kim over here. I don't think this is something that the Attorney General has any purview really talking about or offering reforms about. The Supreme Court is its own animal. It's controlled by the Constitution, and the way they're selected is the way they're selected in this state. I think you're going to have an Attorney General who's going to need to be bold in the cases that are brought before the Montana Supreme Court and the way that they're presented and litigated. But, I mean, just to answer the question bluntly, yeah, I don't think there's any question that we've got a very, unfortunately, oftentimes policy-driven Montana Supreme Court. I think the court should be looking at law, should be interpreting the law as accords to our state constitution. I don't think the state Supreme Court has any business driving a decision towards policy, which unfortunately we do see, I think, too often in this state.
Great, thank you. John?
So to answer the question about whether the Supreme Court should be involved in policy, generally no. It's not the Supreme Court's job to be a super legislature. It's the legislature's job to set spending priorities, to set policy. But I have a little caveat in there, because having worked in the AG's office, there have been areas where we've been able to go to judges, to members of the Supreme Court, to the Chief Justice, and talk about how certain things function. So, for example, treatment courts. We've all been talking about the role of meth, addiction, all of that. We know that we have to do something different when it comes to tackling addiction in our state. I've sat at the same table with judges and others to talk about how do we, from a policy perspective, and then go to the legislature and make recommendations, how do we turn things around so that we actually have effective treatment courts in our state, expand them in places where we already have them, like places like Billings, Bozeman, Helena, and then how do we get treatment courts in places outside in the rural areas. So in general, no, that it's not the Montana Supreme Court's job to set policy. Having said that, I think there are areas where the Attorney General can work with members of the judiciary to make recommendations to the legislature when it comes to things that affect courts.
Great, thank you. Raph?
There's a real temptation to say something different here, but I have to agree. I mean, it's the job of the legislature to set and make policy. The executive branch applies it, and courts interpret it. But in the spirit of your question, I will throw out two reforms I think our trial courts could have that would really help this audience. I think one, finding a way to get our hands around prompt decision making. I know it's a real problem a lot of folks face, and I as a lawyer for the state face as well, where you've got these cases that are tied up for 18, 19, 24 months just waiting for action from the judge. And that can be a real problem when someone's business or livelihood's on the line. I think another one, too, we interview lots of judges in the governor's office for judicial appointments, and everyone says, well, we want to modernize court technology. And we don't see it actually happening out there in the field. And, a lot of courts in Montana, I imagine Roosevelt's probably this way, predominantly still use paper filings, something that Google Forms could do just as easily. And I think if we could see a move in our courts to more accountability around prompt decision-making and actually modernizing our court processes to match the way that we all do work these days, I think we could see a lot of really favorable things in our judicial system.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, next question. And we'll point this question, Raph, to you first. What is one issue that sets you apart from each of your opponents in this race? Presumably a different issue, but doesn't have to be for each of the three.
I think the issue that comes to mind first is, as a practicing lawyer, I have taken on the United States federal government and won. And I think that's important. The constitutional role of the Attorney General is to be your lawyer. It's fidelity to Montana, to its people, to its Constitution first. And a lot of that increasingly means providing a check on the federal government when it goes outside its bounds. About a year and a half ago, the federal government, through the IRS, tried to smuggle in a significant change in how nonprofits report the sources of their donations. And this would have had a massive effect. Well, as all of you businesses know, you can't smuggle in big changes in sort of wink and nod Word documents. You've got to go through a process, notice and comment. You all deal with this. Well, we saw this happening. We said this was wrong, and we sued the IRS. We brought them to federal court in Montana and made them tell a federal judge in Great Falls why they'd done what they'd done, and we beat them, and that rule is gone as a result. And so I think it's really important, again, as you assess, who do I want to hire as my lawyer? Who do I trust to be my advocate? Picking somebody who's actually gone up against the biggest foe out there, the United States federal government, and have been successful in court.
Okay. Raph. Oh. John, why don't we go next with you?
So I think one issue that sets me apart from some of my competitors is just the experience on litigating constitutional issues. In many ways, ones that affect Montana's own sovereignty as it relates to the federal government and federal overreach, but also making sure that when the legislature has spoken on a particular issue, that the Attorney General, if somebody actually sues to declare a law unconstitutional or to get that law thrown out, that it's the Attorney General that's able to step in to the middle and actually defend that law. So for example, on several occasions, Montana has a punitive damages cap in law, and that law has been challenged in district court and then all the way up to Montana Supreme Court. I've been involved in those cases in litigating to make sure that the legislature's policy limits, those punitive damages caps are held. And so far, they have remained in place. They're going to continue to be challenged. But also when it comes to federal overreach, whether it was the war on coal, the waters of the U.S., laws that were passed back during the Obama administration, it was our office, it was banding together with like-minded AGs to hold the federal government accountable to make sure that Montana's economic interests are upheld. And so that kind of experience that I'll be ready to have on day one, if I'm elected as your Attorney General, I think that sets me apart from my competitors.
Great, thank you. Kim.
Thank you. So what sets me apart is my sheer level of experience and the breadth of it. I carry experience that nobody else in this race has. I've been an attorney for over 16 years. I've enforced our laws as a deputy county attorney, holding the hand of rape victims when they go to trial, when they're children. I've been an assistant attorney general, helping children after they've been assaulted by their parents, dealing with child abuse cases. And I've been a legislator reforming our laws in those same areas. But that's just one area, and it just goes to show you the level of experience I have as an assistant attorney general, a deputy county attorney, as well as a legislator, making policy for over 8 years. I've also been a substitute court judge, and I understand our judicial system from the inside out from all levels, and nobody else on this panel has that. I also have been not only a prosecutor, but I've been a private law attorney. I have my own law practice right now. I understand what it's like to have a business in Montana. And I also understand the needs of our citizens. And you're actually only hearing kind of part of what the Attorney General does. It's not just a lawyer that you hire, it's also the chief legal advocate of your state. If you want to see reforms, dealing with cigarette use or any other use, that's the Attorney General's office who will bring those lawsuits and cause reform in those areas. It's also the Attorney General's office who brings reforms to the state legislature, whether they be in human trafficking that I worked extensively with Tim Fox on, or in other areas where I led reforms in our criminal justice system to actually help people get out of the criminal justice system. Those who are addicted to meth, who had mental health issues or other chemical dependency problems, found themselves in the revolving cycle of criminal justice, and we made some key reforms there to actually make our state safer. It will be a while until we see those reforms, but those kind of issues have been ignored for too long. We also made key reforms in areas dealing with missing and murdered Indigenous women. If you want to talk about justice in our state and what the top legal advocate should be doing, that legal advocate should make sure that women, when they're Native American, should not be 10 times more likely to be murdered than non-Native women. That's the kind of Attorney General I will be. I will bring light to those issues that have been ignored for too long and bring people together to get real solutions.
Thank you, Kim. Austin, what is one issue that sets you apart from each of your opponents?
Real easy one, and I'm going to give you a direct answer. The Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. I'm the only candidate sitting up here who is consistently and will continue to consistently be opposed to and fight against the Affordable Care Act. You got one candidate sitting here who proudly brags about having helped write it. You got one candidate up here who supported it and has voted for it, and you got another candidate over here who's filed federal appeals briefs supporting it, asking it to be upheld. Not me. I've opposed the Affordable Care Act. I've owned a business. I've had to pay health insurance. I'm going to guess there's a lot of business owners out here, and I'm going to guess not one of you has seen your health care premiums for yourself or your employees decrease since that ACA was put in place. It's been a train wreck for the country. It's been a train wreck for the state. So that's a real easy issue that I can bluntly put out there that differentiates me on the rest of the candidates. We can keep going. I can talk about some more. I can talk about natural resources experience. I've actually worked in the natural resources field as an attorney. I've worked for industry. I've worked for landowners. I understand how an oil rig works. I understand how a coal mine works. I've looked at a coal lease. I've looked at oil and gas leases, thousands of them. I've been involved in these industries from a business perspective and from a lawyer perspective. The land board is an important job for the Attorney General. That's where state revenue that runs our schools comes from. Don't we think it's important to have at least one person on the land board who's maybe looked at an oil and gas lease before? Here I am. There's two easy ones.
Great, thank you, Austin. And since we ended with you, we'll begin with you on this next one. Attorneys general are in the business of interpreting and enforcing the law. If elected, would you see your role as AG as that of an activist with freedom to interpret the law to new situations and administrations, or that of a constructionist, interpreting the law strictly through the lens of original intent? Austin.
Very easy question. I'm a strict constructionist. I do not believe it's the job of an executive such as the Attorney General to be looking at what the legislature passed and trying to put my own spin on it and interpreting what I think that means. I think the law says what it says, it means what it means, and if there's any question about what it means, it's really easy to go back into the legislative minutes and the record and see what they meant. I'm absolutely a constructionist. I don't think there's any place for an executive such as the Attorney General who is in charge of enforcing the laws in the state of Montana to be putting your own stamp and your own activism on that.
Thank you, Austin. Raph?
Couldn't agree more. I think that it's the AG's job. It's straight in the Constitution. You're the state's chief legal officer. Now, one caveat to that, the state and by extension the public, you are the client. And I wish it were as easy as, oh, the law says this, the answer must be this. And I think where you really want to think about who your AG candidate is look to those situations where it hasn't been so easy, where the answer isn't obvious. And that's where the difference in who's going to put in the work, who's got the experience, who takes these kinds of cases, makes a difference for folks like you, makes a difference for the public. So I couldn't agree more with Austin about the fact that the AG is not a policymaker. The AG is your attorney. You are the client. But when it comes to these tough questions, you have to think about who do you want there in the driver's seat making those sorts of calls, making the arguments for you in court as the public.
Excellent. Thank you. John?
Ditto. So the one thing that I will add to that is that there is a small role where the Attorney General does interpret the law, and that's AG opinions. And so that is almost a quasi-judicial function that the Attorney General has, that when a county attorney, a city attorney, the Speaker of the House, the President of the Senate, the chair of a board of a commission, if they have a legal question that there's really no court case out there, they can submit an AG opinion, and then we interpret the law. But by and large, it's the role of the Attorney General to defend the law as it's passed by the legislature, regardless of which party passed it. And that's oftentimes one of the awkward parts of being the Attorney General is if you're a Democrat, you've got Democrats often telling you, here's how you should do your job, and Republicans telling a Republican Attorney General, here's how you do your job. But by and large, it's your job to enforce the law, protect the rule of law, regardless of who passed those laws. And so I guess I couldn't agree more, except for the fact that the Attorney General has a small role in interpreting the law.
Thank you, Raph. And Kim?
This is actually an easy one. I think we all agree. We've all been to law school. And we understand what the role of the Attorney General is. It is just in interpreting our laws and enforcing them. We're not supposed to be putting our own stamp on them. That being said, I agree with John that we do have the advisory opinions. Where laws are unclear, that's when the Attorney General should intervene there. But if a law is clear and an opinion is asked just because somebody has a predetermined result that they want, it's not really the goal of the Attorney General to use those advisory opinions to promote specific policy agendas. It is important, though, that when the Attorney General is enforcing the laws, that they look at what happened in the legislature, and that sometimes the testimony presented, if the law is not clear, the testimony presented is important, as well as what citizens had to say. We heard about the Affordable Care Act, and we're all familiar with that, as well as the high cost of our health insurance right now. But I've proudly passed the Affordable Care Act twice, and I would do it again. I also have fought for against rising costs in prescription drugs. But that's not because not passing the Affordable Care Act would make health care less expensive in our state. And if you listen to the testimony that was given in the legislature, that's actually the exact opposite is true. If we wouldn't have passed the Affordable Care Act, healthcare would have been more expensive and less accessible. In addition, rural hospitals would have closed. So I think that the Attorney General needs to be familiar with the legislature, with the process, and have a good relationship with that entity so that it can discuss laws if necessary and go forward. But the Attorney General definitely, his role is to enforce the laws as written, and that's what the Attorney General should be doing.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you, everyone, so far for being succinct in your answers. We're making great time. We're all warmed up now. I haven't pushed back much with follow-up questions, but now that we're kind of ready to roll, we'll move into the next set of questions. And I'd ask you to answer this question in the direct way in which it's intended. And Kim, since you went last, you can go first. The question is this: it has been a common practice for AGs to outsource lucrative legal work to politically connected law firms. The firms then contribute large sums to the AG's campaign for re-election or higher office. Is this an example of the AG using the powers of the office for personal benefit? And if so, how would you make changes to this practice? Kim, please start us off.
I won't make a decision as to whether or not that's the Attorney General using it for personal benefit. I'm aware of the issue, and it's not something that I think I would readily do unless necessary. But I also think that if you look at actually who's contributing to our campaigns and where the money's coming from, three of us up here have most of our money coming from in-state, but another person doesn't. And if you look at who's going to be doing money and who's going to be trying to trade favors and be influenced by large corporations, look at where that's money coming from also. Because I think you'll see that that will probably be the way that person is going to be operating in office. As far as quid pro quo, that you offer a contract and then the person contributes to your campaign, I think that unfortunately we have about 1 million people in this state, and we all know each other. I know most of the people in this room. And just because you outsource work to someone or they give to your campaign doesn't mean that anything untoward is happening. It's not my experience in Montana politics, and I expect better from people in our state, and I've seen better.
Okay. Thank you, Kim. And Austin, will go next to you. And if any candidate would like the question repeated, please just let me know. Austin, same question.
Yeah, fantastic question. I think it absolutely is a problem. I think it absolutely happens. I'm not opposed to the Attorney General's office contracting with attorneys because, I mean, as you folks all know, you've all had to hire a lawyer. Lawyers are no different than doctors. You know, if you've got a toothache, you don't go to your podiatrist. You need to get the right lawyer with the right experience in the right areas. As a matter of practicality, the Department of Justice is not going to have specialized lawyers in all these areas, and there are going to certainly be times where you need to hire the right specialist to handle the right kind of litigation. Absolutely happens. The problem we've got right now is we've got a current Attorney General and administration that is absolutely hiring a handful of one or two very partisan law firms, and they're giving their campaign donations to the other side. I really can't understand why this is happening, but it is happening right now to the tune of, well, I mean, we kind of have a hard time figuring out exactly how much of this money is going to some of these law firms, but I can tell you for sure one of them getting about $500,000 in the last couple of years. And that candidate, that law firm, despite being paid by a current Republican has donated, already maxed out to one of the Democrat candidates sitting here. I don't understand why this is happening. I think it's something we definitely need to get a handle on. I think we definitely need to have an attorney general in there who's cognizant of this and is picking the right contract attorneys for the right job. I don't think there's a problem with doing it, but I think we do need to be cognizant of giving it to the same handful of Democrat liberal trial lawyer law firms that are donating to the same parties over and over and over.
Okay, thank you, Austin. And Rafe?
I think it's really important to have a fair process, process there. And actually, in my work in the executive branch, the DOJ is separate, what we're talking about here. But the work that I do when agencies hire lawyers, we actually have a process in place to try to prevent conflicts like this. And so this actually dates back to a 1980s executive order from old Governor Schwinden, who said we ought to have some sort of approval when we hire outside lawyers. And John actually sits on that committee that approves those outside lawyers. And basically the process works like this. If an agency has a big problem that they've identified, they need to hire someone outside their agency to fix that problem. They go through a competitive process of finding the right law firm for them. They then propose it to our office, the governor's office, and we forward it on to a committee that includes John and the budget director and some other folks. I think that's a good idea for hiring outside counsel. I think we have to have a fair process, and I wouldn't oppose the same at DOJ.
Thank you, Rafe. And finally, John.
I guess the problem that I have with Mr. Knudsen's answer there is that he basically said that he would get rid of attorneys that have the experience, the background, because they didn't support the attorney general in their race. And that's problematic. You make those decisions based on the experience, the knowledge that those lawyers have. And in the case that he's talking about, those are lawyers that had experience in this particular issue for decades. So to get rid of them just because they didn't support my boss sounds exactly like the problem that you were asking about to begin with. But just as Mr. Graybill talked about, there is a process in place, and I've been a part of that, and I think it's the Roscoe era. I don't think it's Schwinden, but
Have the EO. It's in a typewriter.
all right,
font.
well, we'll settle this later. We'll settle this later. It is important that when there's agencies seeking to hire outside counsel that there's this process, and that's because the Attorney General has a small arm called Agency Legal Services where they provide legal services at a very reasonable rate, a flat rate. We've got great competent people, and if agencies want to go outside of that process, for example, for expertise, maybe there's a conflict, then it's good to have this legal review process. And it is an executive order, and maybe it's something that should be put into statute, and that's something that I would definitely take a look at. But I do feel like in terms of the hiring your political allies to do your legal work, that is not the way it should be done, and that's not the way it has been done. And it won't be the way that I do it as Attorney General either.
Thank you. And just on that question, what I don't believe I heard was any of the candidates say that in the event there are legal engagements, contingent or otherwise, that are very lucrative for an outside firm, that would then introduce a prohibition for subsequent political contributions. If I'm mistaken, any of the four candidates, feel free to speak up, but I didn't hear anybody suggest that such a prohibition would be appropriate. Is that fair?
Certainly something I would take a look at.
I guess I would have concerns about restriction on free speech and your right to associate. That's pretty strictly laid out in the First Amendment, and I think if someone wants to make a campaign contribution, they can. I guess that's about as good a response as I can give to that one.
And I just have, there's actually already an ethics opinion on this question. So you basically look to, are these firms routinely giving? Are other firms that are similar that didn't get the work also giving to this candidate? In that case, it's okay. But I think clearly if there's an indication of pay to play, we don't want that.
And I agree with that. I think we need to make sure everything is done fairly, and there are already rules in place. I agree also with John. If there was an issue, I think it should be reviewed, but as of now, I don't see any reason to change things.
Okay. All right. Well, John, you finished. So you'll start us off here. Understanding that as Attorney General, you would have a number of high priorities. At the end of the day, resources like time, money, and manpower are finite and need to be allocated as such. I'd like you to rank these three topics in order of your highest to lowest priority. even if they are all very high. Also, if one of your highest priorities isn't among these three, feel free to substitute one out and put yours in. Number 1, opioid meth. Number 2, human trafficking. And number 3, school safety.
I would actually definitely put opioid, meth. I would throw alcohol, other illicit drugs in there as number 1. I think they're all very, very important issues. I don't think you always need to choose, but when you look at the impact that substance use disorder has around our state, it's phenomenal. And it's phenomenal not only to the quality of life, but to public safety and to the finances of the state budget. Just consider when somebody gets addicted, whether it's to meth, opioids, alcohol, and they start getting into trouble. They're going to get arrested, they're going to jail, they need a public defender, there's potentially a trial. If they go to prison, they may have their kids taken away from them. The ripple effect in terms of the number of state agencies that are involved and the cost is incredible. We need to do more in terms of prevention when it comes, and I don't feel like the state has an overall prevention strategy, and that's something that I hope to spearhead as the next Attorney General. We know we can't keep everybody from getting addicted to these terrible substances, but we can chip away, and it's not just the government's problem to solve. I think this is something that government should be partnering with employers, with nonprofits and churches to start tackling this big problem because it's incredible the impact that it's having on public safety, kids' lives. But the other two things are incredibly important as well. School safety, human trafficking. Human trafficking wasn't even on the radar screen before Attorney General Tim Fox came on board. And there were a number of people in the legislature, not everybody, but there are many people that questioned whether this was an issue or not. We made it a priority, we made it a bipartisan priority, and we started rounding up people and saying, how can we change the law? How can we make sure that we use public education campaigns to get this on the radar screen? And we did that with almost no resources from the legislature. We're starting to see more resources come. School safety, I think there's an incredible role that we can play in making sure that law enforcement is trained for these scenarios, and the Montana Law Enforcement Academy is under the umbrella of the Attorney General, making sure that schools working through the OPI and school districts, making sure that they have safety plans in place. That's all incredibly important. It's hard to pick, but definitely the addiction crisis, I think, is something that the Attorney General can provide more leadership on, and I'm happy to do that.
Thank you, John, for that answer. And the candidates can note that the red flag that Bridger's holding there gives you 15 seconds to continue. And that was good. Thank you for that answer. And Kim, would you like me to repeat the 3 points?
No, I've got it.
Okay.
Thank you. So I actually agree with John on this. We've both worked on policy for a while now in the legislature. I've examined the state budget for over 8 years. I know where our money is spent. I know what works, and I know what doesn't work. We spend a lot of money in our state because of meth addiction. Opioid addiction is actually not one of the bigger problems. We have a growing heroin problem, but alcohol disorder is also a big problem in our state. We don't have enough chemical dependency treatment in our state, and I think that should be one of the priorities that the Attorney General leads on. We need to not only give lip service to it and talk about how we need more services, but actually do something about it. For the 8 years I've been in the legislature, and God, for the 10 years before that, I was an attorney and registered nurse and a domestic violence advocate. All we ever heard was that we don't have enough treatment in our state. I mean, I'm sure most of you probably know someone who's been in addiction and who's struggling with that. And we hear there's not enough treatment. So my question is, why don't we do something about that? Isn't that actually what our state leaders are supposed to be doing, is prioritizing that? I read one report that said we have about 90,000 or so people facing addiction in our state. Most of that is alcohol related. Meth is the next biggest leader, especially when it comes to violent crimes and child abuse. But we only have enough treatment for 10% of those. So where's all that money going to? It's not regionally located. We have very few treatment centers in our state, and we need to really change how the money that we already have is being allocated and spent to deal with the chemical dependency issues in our state. And we need people who aren't afraid to talk about money, who actually understand it, who have managed a multi-million-dollar budget for years, which I have done. And I also have the training and experience to understand how we need to approach it. So I think dealing with our chemical dependency issues, is meth and opioids, but really it's meth and alcohol in our state, growing heroin problem, need to be dealt with. I think one of the problems we have as, basically people in general and elected people is we go with whatever is the new issue of the day. About 8 years ago, that was human trafficking, and I did work with John as well as Attorney General Fox on that issue. We did some great reforms. And now it's missing and murdered Indigenous women. But now we're also talking about school safety. School safety is an issue. Nobody wants their children to be harmed. But you know what else is an issue? Child sexual abuse and child abuse. 1 out of every 5 girls is sexually abused, and that's been pretty constant for decades now, but no one likes to talk about it. I mean, if we really want to look at harms and what leads to problems later in life, teen pregnancy, chemical dependency issues, being an unskilled worker who can't hold a job, we need to look at dealing with the adverse childhood experiences that impact our children in our state. So as far as what I would say are my priorities are chemical dependency, child abuse, and making sure that our state is safe for everyone, whether that's human trafficking or disabled people or other people who are facing problems. But those are my 3 priorities.
Thank you, Kim. Austin.
No question. Priority number 1 on that list is the meth problem. Folks, I am the county attorney, criminal prosecutor in Roosevelt County. If you don't know Roosevelt County, most of Roosevelt County is the Fort Peck Indian Reservation. I'm dealing with this every single day. And I actually will take this a step further. I can tell you unequivocally that the human trafficking and child sex abuse problems that are arising in the state are tied directly to the meth problem. One has led to a cascade of other problems. This is what is driving the violent crime problem in the state. And make no mistake, we have a tremendous violent crime problem in this state. And the numbers bear that out. Again, not my numbers. These are the state's numbers, nonpartisan numbers. In the last 5 years, aggravated assaults have increased 30%. In the last 5 years, rapes have increased 32%. In the last 5 years, homicides up 68%. This is all being driven by the methamphetamine problem. This meth is all coming out of across the southern border. This is all cartel problem. And it is creating a whole, like I said, cascade of just other problems. It's leading to human trafficking. It's leading to prostitution. It's leading to child sex abuse. It's leading to child neglect. These problems are all coming from this meth problem. We're starting to see more and more heroin, which is terrifying. But you know what's even more terrifying? When you start finding heroin with fentanyl laced into it, and deaths and crime scenes. This is the next thing that's coming, and we're starting to see more and more of it. This is Chinese fentanyl that's being shipped into Mexico, given to the cartels, and the cartels are cutting their heroin with it. And the stuff is absolutely lethal in minute amounts. People are trying meth, getting hooked on meth, and at that point, what the heck, let's try some heroin. You have got no idea what's in it and what's been cut with, and now we end up with more deaths. That's number 1, no question. As I said, it's connected to human trafficking. I think if you address one, you're going to address the other. School safety's, obviously one that's very important to everybody. It's kind of a push-button issue right now. Honestly, I think that's one, and I've looked at this a lot at the county level. Locals have a lot of control there, and I think can handle that the best. Your sheriff's office has got resources. School districts have a lot of authority and can do a lot of things there. And in my experience, school districts are doing that.
Thank you, Austin. Raph.
I would agree with Austin's point about local control, and I think even on the meth issue as well. We have to really invest in and trust our local authorities. But the other candidates are right. I was speaking with someone recently in federal law enforcement, and they said on the cases on their docket, about 80% of the criminal cases are somehow derived from meth. It might be a felon in possession of a firearm, but it's a meth bust. And so meth really does drive this cycle of violent crime in our state. And statistically, meth really is a much bigger problem than opioids. Opioids are very serious. Commend the AG's office for its litigation on that case, but we are a meth state. And I think as we think about this meth problem, we have to remember we've been here before, right? Go back to 2000 to 2005. We also had a meth epidemic. I grew up in Great Falls, where occasionally meth lab would blow up a couple blocks from my house. We had this issue before. And I think one of the things we learned from our prior experience with the meth crisis is, yes, we have to focus on supply. We have to be tough on people that deal meth or traffic in meth, but that's not the entire picture. And I think we've learned that just warehousing people, particularly people who use and don't deal, isn't a long-term or viable way to solve drug abuse problems. And for you, for employers, it's not a good solution for your workforce issue. How are you going to fill jobs if folks are incarcerated the whole time or can't break out of that cycle? And so I think as we look at this meth problem, we have to go back to the past and learn from our successes, learn from what we did before about focusing on all sides of the issue, being holistic about it. As to the other issues, I have an 8-month-old daughter, so human trafficking and school safety are both terrifying issues to me. But I agree. I think local control is important. I think working with the legislature is important. I commend the good work that's been done there. I don't think anyone would tell you that we've done enough on either of those issues. And I think it's critical that your next Attorney General have real ideas about what to do.
Great. Thank you. And I see a couple people holding up their iPhones to film, which you're certainly welcome to do. This is also being filmed professionally, and I believe will be made available to folks who are interested in seeing it afterwards. That's why I'm not wearing my readers, since my teenage daughter says it makes me look old and, quote, sort of pathetic. So, Rafe, since you finished us off, you can start us back up again. Consumer privacy laws. States like California have recently passed tough consumer privacy laws. What is your position on the current status of Montana's consumer privacy laws, given Montana has an explicit right to privacy in our Constitution? And do you believe this needs to be addressed?
Yeah, and I think we're living at an interesting time, right? So in Europe, we have the European, what's called the GDPR, the General Data Privacy Regulation, which is this really, really prescriptive, strict way of thinking about privacy. Then we have California last year passing a law that does sort of an American version, a little bit more watered down, a little bit more American and different, that just took effect, I believe, on the 1st. And so I think it's really important as we address this. I mean, let's face it, we're not going to get away from the privacy issue. Everyone cares about privacy. We have to do something about it. But I think we have a real chance in a state like Montana to learn from what's going on in California. We don't need to rush in the same way as California did. We're lucky that someone else went first. But David, as you mentioned, Montana does have a unique story to tell here. We have this unique, explicit right to privacy in our Constitution. And so I absolutely would make privacy a priority. It's been a priority of my campaign so far. We're going to figure out how these little data trackers in our pocket interact with our laws and with our civil society. And I think we're very fortunate that California's gone first. Personally, I'm not so sure I like the really prescriptive approach, saying you have to do items A through D. I might be in favor of a common law approach, finding certain sort of standards we want to follow and let courts sort it out based on the details. But we're at a really critical time in our country right now. We're watching what's going on in Europe. We're watching what's going on in California. And fortunately, I do not think we're going to be stuck with another state's solution.
Great. Thank you. John?
It would be ideal if Congress would get off its butt and actually come up with some good standards that could be universally applied, that businesses from state to state would understand what the standards are. I'm a little bit skeptical of what Congress is going to be able to do over the next year, maybe off into the future. It's incredibly frustrating to see more and more power be amassed in Washington, D.C., and either them being unable or unable to wield that power in any kind of effective way. And so we absolutely need privacy laws. I think people would be shocked, scared to understand the extent to which their information is out there. But consumer education is an important piece of this. I think in the Attorney General's role, of course, with consumer protection, there are ways to make sure that consumers are protecting their information, keeping things private, and that is something that I look forward to doing as Attorney General more. How do we step up on the consumer education piece to make sure on privacy people aren't losing their personal information, they're not being scammed? I think that is an important role for the Attorney General. But again, I'd like to see Congress act. I'm a little bit skeptical if they will, and if they won't, then I think it's perfectly great for Montana to do it.
Great. Thank you, John. Kim?
There we go. Montana does have a unique right to privacy, and we haven't really fully discussed that. So we have a right to privacy that really no other states have the way we do. And it protects many things. In 2015, I was actually forward thinking on this issue, and I changed our state's law dealing with child identity theft because I saw how children's information was being misused frequently by parents or caregivers and ruining their credit, their lives, and their ability to get cars or education or homes. So now we've seen things change a little bit more, and as far as privacy goes in Montana, we're seeing pushes nationally that we should all really be concerned about. And it's not just our electronic data that we should be concerned about. We're seeing pushes against women's right to reproductive health care, which explicitly deals with our right to privacy in Montana. So as far as what California has done, I've actually talked with some lawmakers there who I know, as well as some businesses there, and there are problems with that. We should actually learn from what they've done, but rather than just wholesale adopt something from another state, which doesn't fit for Montana, we need to have a Montana solution where we do what I talked about before, whereas we communicate, and I would do, communicate with the business community, collaborate on solutions, and then create a positive solution for Montana that works for everyone. I think we need to bring everyone together and make real Montana solutions that matter and not just look at what other states have done because it's the new hot issue to deal with. So as far as California, they're great. They have great sunshine, but I don't think we should be adopting their laws necessarily. And we need to do better for our state, but we need to look at things more so than just medical records. There are a lot of pushes against our right to privacy we should all be concerned about, regardless of your gender.
Great, thank you, Kim. And finally, Austin.
Yeah, I'm incredibly dubious when it comes to talking about legislation dealing with privacy issues. I mean, I think it's easy to sit here and make platitudes and say Congress should do something. I mean, this is something we've actually dealt with in the Montana legislature when I was the speaker. We had a couple of bills. I'm very nervous anytime we are going to private industries and telling them what they can and cannot do with property or information they've gathered. Now, I might not like the fact that Apple has gathered information about me, but nobody put a gun to my head and make me buy an iPhone. Right? I made that choice to purchase that item, and if in doing that I voluntarily gave Apple, or pick your company, right? If I gave that company some information that company can now say, hey, this is a commodity we can do something with, that's property. Again, I might not like how they got that property. I might not like the fact that they've got it, but that's a private company that now owns a commodity. And we step in and start telling private companies what they can and can't do with that commodity, which data is becoming a bigger and bigger commodity these days. I think we can really be getting on a slippery slope. There's a lot of personal responsibility that has to come into this whole privacy discussion. I think we're in a situation with technology nowadays. We have to be asking ourselves, okay, you want privacy? Well, maybe let's not be posting everything on Facebook. Maybe we don't need a smart TV in every room. Maybe we unplug Alexa for a little while. And maybe these issues kind of go away, or at least get mitigated to some extent. I'm very cautious when we start talking about a wholesale legislation telling private industry what it can or cannot do with a commodity that they have gotten their hands on. But I mean, I think it's an issue that's not going away. I think we're going to be talking about it more and more. And as the Attorney General, I'm going to be keeping a very cautious eye on any kind of legislation that comes out, whether it's federally or statewide.
Great, thank you, Austin. And I have only one more question that I'll be asking the panelists, and at that point we'll turn it out to you, the audience. So I won't be able to get to some good questions that I've got on the State Land Board and corner jumping and vaping and prison reform, elder issues. But when we get to this next section, whether it's those or anything else that you're interested in, please start to give that some thought so we can pose some questions from you to the candidates. I have one last question, and Austin, since you finished us, you can start us off again, and it's related to DUIs and the fact that the risk of drunk drivers impacts all Montanans. Assuming you are aware of the unsuccessful attempt to address this issue legislatively in the last session, what is your position on the DUI laws, and what would you do to make a reform effort successful?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously an issue. It's obviously one that I deal with a lot. When I first took office as the county attorney in Roosevelt County a year ago, I grabbed the staff and sat down, and we made it a policy position that we are going to have a zero tolerance for DUIs. We're not plea bargaining these things out, which I know that's something that's done quite often. If they want to take a plea, fine, they're going to plead to a DUI. We're not going to drop them down to a reckless driving or a wet reckless or anything like that. So that's something that's personally very important to me. The position I take, and I see this having prosecuted a number of these things in the last year, is at a certain point, certain people are going to drink and drive. I think no number of laws that you pass are going to stop certain addicted individuals from drinking and driving. I think what stops them from doing it is on repeat offenses, we got to get tough with them. And they need to do some jail time to make this absolutely hurt. Lessening offenses on them and letting them off on pleas is not the answer. But I don't. Several things in that bill last session gave me very, very great cause of concern. A mandatory blood draw on a first pullover. I mean, you've got just massive constitutional issues with that. I mean, whether or not you agree with the intent, and I can certainly appreciate the intent. We don't want drunk drivers on the road. But when you start giving a police officer the right to unilaterally say, you, citizen, will give me your blood right now, you are implicating a huge Fourth Amendment constitutional issue. That's what we have judges and warrants for, and that's the way it works now. If I've got police officers that think someone is drunk, go to the judge and get a warrant. This is the way our system is supposed to work, and this is the way it works now. So there were some real issues with that bill last session. Again, I think any kind of reforms, anything we can do to curb drunk driving is a good thing. But I think adding more laws to the books, it just doesn't seem to be working. I think what works, whether you're talking about DUI or whether you're talking about multiple drug offenses, what works is some discipline. What works is getting these people some help, some monitoring, some probation, and once in a while, we have to use the stick and not the carrot.
Great. Thank you, Austin. I saw some bipartisan head nods to the mandatory blood draw point that you made. Raph, would you want to address the same question for us?
Yeah, I think Representative Knudsen is going to be alarmed how often we agree in today's debate. I can't get on board with a mandatory first-time blood draw. I think that there are a lot of features of the law that was proposed that are appealing, but the idea that you as a Montanan get in your car and thereby consent to a warrantless blood draw is something I can't get behind. I think our state constitution wouldn't support it. I think colloquially none of us would support it. I think the laws as they are now provide a range of tools for prosecutors. I think when you're talking about folks who, I think Austin referenced these people as well, who are on their 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th DUI, that's a real problem. And you talk to prosecutors around our state, and they'll say that's a real problem. And I think, I don't think a one-size-fits-all approach is what we need. I think the proposal to have these really steep and really expensive mandatory minimums was the wrong approach. But I think allowing prosecutors who know these folks in their communities to work with people, maybe treatment is what you need. And I think on your 7th, 8th DUI probably is what you need. Maybe it is punishment. But I think allowing and empowering local officials to make those kinds of decisions, our laws now give them that kind of flexibility. I can't get behind a warrantless first-time blood draw.
Great. And John?
So the bill that they're talking about is our bill that we crafted to really go after DUI overall. If you look at our code, the DUI code is one of the messiest scattered pieces of law out there. It's very difficult for new prosecutors, new judges, new defense attorneys to understand. So what we were going to do is just wipe the whole thing out, condense it down to nearly about a third of what it was before without taking away any of the substance. Just make it simple to understand. And then go after some of those sacred cows that we've built in overall in the law. So for example, you've heard a lot about blood warrants. Blood warrants require you to go to a judge. It's a judge that makes the determination whether there's probable cause if the person is intoxicated or drugged. And that's another thing that, whenever we hear drunk driving, well, we're thinking about alcohol. We see more and more polysubstance use. People might be on alcohol. They might be on marijuana. They might be on meth. These kinds of things are perfect to be captured in a blood draw, but it first has to go to a judge. And that's how it is for a second DUI, third DUI. And that was passed back in 2011, and Mr. Knudsen actually voted against that. If we didn't have that in place, we would be unable to hold a lot of people accountable early on in the addiction cycle. People who have encountered law enforcement for the first time on either drunk or drug driving, do you think it's the first time that they've gone out in their car drunk or drugged? No. Statistics show they may have been out hundreds of times. If we can't hold them accountable that first time and actually get them into treatment, get them the resources that they need, they are going to become the people that get those fifth and sixth subsequent DUIs, and they're going to kill somebody. And there's a reason Montana continues to be at the top. It's not because we're the most unlucky state in the world or in the country. There's a reason we continue to be at the top in terms of killing people on our roadways. It has to do with the law. It has to do with the attitude that we have about drinking and driving or doing drugs and driving, and we need to turn that around. And if I'm the Attorney General, we're going to take another crack at that, make sure that we build on the success of what we've been doing, and it's an important issue. Thanks.
Thank you, John. And finally, Kim.
So you're actually hearing only about one bill. There was actually a few bills last session dealing with DUIs. You've heard about the one that was from the Attorney General's office, and that would have given law enforcement additional tools. Some people thought it was an overreach by the government and possibly could have been used for racial profiling by law enforcement officers, whether intentionally or not. But that actually is not what we should be focusing on right now. The discussion is, what should we do about drunk driving in our state? And there was another bill that we actually passed in the legislature with great support that would have provided additional penalties for their 7th and 8th DUIs. Let me tell you, having been a prosecutor and been a nurse and worked with people with addictions and known people with addictions, by the time you get a 7th or 8th DUI, you don't need treatment. You need to be locked up before you kill someone. And then maybe once you get locked up, you can get treatment somehow if you have some sort of, come to Jesus moment. But we need to look at how we can actually get those people off of the streets so they aren't a danger to other people, but we can't jail our way out of the problem. That's the other side of the coin. We need to look at how we're going to treat this. And you keep hearing, well, maybe we should treat it more, but nobody's actually talking about how to do that and going to be willing to go to the legislature, ask for funding, work with the Department of Public Health and Human Services, work with their addictions, work with the courts, treatment courts, with the governor's office, and all of those need to work together to deal with the addiction problem we have in our state. It's ripping apart our communities. It's hurting people. Addiction is not a moral failing. It is a health issue. And there is no other health issue that we are so condemning to people on. If you know somebody in your life who's facing addiction, you probably remember them before they were. And we know that they need help, and we need to figure out how to prioritize that in our state, but also how to keep people safe. And doing what we've been doing hasn't worked. I've been part of reforms trying to change that in our state, but we need more funding, and we need to utilize the funding we have in a more effective way to make sure that our streets are safe, that people won't be killed by drunk drivers, and that people won't kill themselves.
Excellent. Thank you, Kim, and thank you all four from my perspective for my questions. And now we'll turn it out to the audience for some questions. And I'd ask, if you have your question, you can direct it to any one or any combination of the candidates, and a candidate who is not directly asked the question can feel free to chime in afterwards on their perspective if they'd like, but they're under no obligation. Can I see a hand up for a riveting question in the back?
Thank you. Question, I guess, for the whole panel here. Curious, we've seen in other states a lot of the impacts of legalizing marijuana on the population. I'm just curious, no matter what side you're on the issue, curious what you think of the impact on our people here and what we need to do or what the Attorney General should do if that legislation is coming in the future.
Anybody like to take that first? Sure. Thanks, Raph.
Well, I think, like it or not, that question's in the hands of the voters this election cycle. I think there's upwards of an estimate of maybe 4 different initiatives, and we'll see how many of them actually make it to the ballot. But I think this is a big issue, and it's coming up, and Montanans are going to make a choice on it. I had the opportunity recently to go to Colorado through a National Governors Association deal and basically talk with their marijuana regulating officials about, a couple of years in, what's this look like? And it was really interesting. And I think a couple things I took away from that was, one, they said, don't legalize because you think it's going to fund your schools. The amount of revenue that actually comes into the state from marijuana when it's recreationally legalized is actually pretty slim. Do it because you're concerned about maybe the focus of law enforcement, something like that. Do it for a moral reason, but don't do it for the funding. Another thing they pointed out that we really are going to have to grapple with if this becomes a reality in Montana is it creates all these pressures on states that are adjacent to the legalized state, right? So a lot of drugs go from Colorado across the border into neighboring states where it begins legal on its journey and it ends up being sold somewhere that's illegal. I think, fortunately, we have the examples of Washington, California, D.C., Colorado, other states looking at this, but I think we have to be really thoughtful as these initiatives come together and make sure if voters are going to make this choice, the choices they have are good ones and choices that have been contemplative and thought out and really build on the experiences of other states who've dealt with this issue.
Thank you, Rafe. Austin?
So my concern with legalizing marijuana, whether it happens or whether it doesn't happen, again, I think maybe you're right, Rafe. We're going to agree once again here. This is going to get decided by the voters in a voter initiative. If it does happen, one of my primary concerns is how it affects you all. I want to make sure that businesses still have the right to decide how and what kind of person they're going to hire and what kind of standards they have. We can't have high UPS drivers. And I think businesses need to be able to retain the ability to maintain their own policies and procedures on what we're going to tolerate in this company and what we're not going to tolerate in this company. What I don't want to see is we get in a situation where we've got a flood of litigation because, okay, legalized marijuana is here and someone comes to work high and you terminate them and suddenly we've got a human rights violation case because they feel like you violated their human rights or their workers' rights in the state of Montana. I think that's where the legislature is going to have to step in, and we're going to have to make sure we really clarify that. That's one of the really big concerns with this whole legalization push that I see. Probably the biggest one that concerns me is making sure that you all have the right to control your own destiny still.
Great. Thank you. Kim or John, anything to add to that, or should we move on?
I'll do it. I was part of a select group of legislators across the nation who attended one of the first marijuana summits down in Colorado. And we talked with industry leaders from different states to hear from them, from their attorney generals, from their lawmakers and we also even heard from doctors about what they think about what their states have done, what's worked and what hasn't worked. And all I can say is thank God we're not the first ones doing it. There have been a lot of successes and a lot of failures, and if the voters decide to legalize recreational adult use marijuana, then that's something that the Attorney General should be able to figure out how to successfully implement in a safe way so children aren't harmed, so that it doesn't cross state boundaries, and so that we have safe banking with it. That's one of the biggest problems. You as business people, how banking works. It's not easy. I've been talking with some of our local marijuana dispensaries, and it's not easy to actually utilize a bank. Many of them use credit unions, but we have a problem if we have suitcases of cash going around our state. It increases the chance of crime. It increases a lot of other bad things that could happen. So the Attorney General, I don't think, should be an advocate one way or the other. It should reflect what the people want to do in the state, but it needs to be done safely so kids aren't hurt, so it stays out of the hands of people who are going to do harm with it, and so it doesn't cross state boundaries.
Great, John. Thank you, Kim.
So I'm definitely concerned about the problems that are associated with legalizing marijuana in Montana. I think it's interesting to watch the impacts in other states, Colorado, Washington, and others. When I worked for the Chamber back in 2011, and there were a whole bunch of sweeping medical marijuana reforms, we made sure, and I helped pass, a part of that bill was to make sure that employers could still, as a part of their business, make sure that they had safe work environment, and that just because somebody had a medical marijuana card didn't give them a license to come to work high. And I think that's a different analysis than the legalizing, but I would agree, we want to make sure going forward that we have safe workplaces, we don't have workplace injuries. A big piece of this is going back to prevention. I hate to sound like a broken record, but if we're going to legalize this substance, there will be a new crop of kids that think because it's legal, it's okay to do. What we know about marijuana is that it has an impact on people's mental health long term, especially on the developing brain. And so for some kid to think, well, it can't be that bad because it's legal, that greatly concerns me about the long-term impacts. We have to have good prevention programs in place that tackle meth, opioids, marijuana, and alcohol. And I'm going to spearhead that effort if if I get into office. When you look at the current vaping crisis, so we have, as Mr. Graybill pointed out, a tremendous number of kids that are trying vaping. Here we are thinking about legalizing marijuana. Again, I'm very concerned about what that means. Having said that, it's probably going to be on the ballot. I'm not sure what kind of efforts are going to be out there, pro and con, but if I'm the Attorney General, I'll make sure to address the impacts if it's passed.
Great, thank you. I believe we have time for at least one more audience question if we keep our candidate answers short and succinct. Is there another question from the audience? All right. I will take that as a sign of the moderator developing comprehensive questions that have just exhausted everybody's perspective on that. Well, with that, we are creeping up at right around the scheduled time to be concluding. So we'll end with a 1-minute closing remark from each of the four candidates. And continuing with the math that we were using, we'll go Kim, then Austin, then Raph, then John. And so, Kim, if you'd start us off, please, with a 1-minute closing remark.
I'd like to thank all of you for being here and for being engaged in this process. We're fortunate to live in the United States where we have a political process where people can talk to the people who are running, ask questions, and figure out where they stand on issues. I'd ask for your support for the Attorney General race because I have the broadest experience on the most relevant issues and can deliver results that matter to our citizens. I'd love to talk with you more. I'm always available. I'd love to travel to your town, talk with you about your issues. I've also been working on business development issues throughout our state, and I'd love to talk with you more. As a caveat, I'm also chair of the Finance Committee, which I saw some of our members here earlier. You'll hear from one of them tomorrow, Representative Jones. And we are doing a comprehensive study of our tax structure. So it's not really the Attorney General's job, but it deals with our tax structure. We're looking at it from top to bottom. If you care about your taxes, there's talk of a sales tax, there's talk of rolling back different taxes, of our antiquated tax system, then please be involved. We are starting our legislative meetings in about a week on the 13th. And so I'd ask all of you as community members and business members, if you care about taxes and where your money goes, be involved, and I'd love to work with you on that too. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Kim. Austin.
So, folks, if there is a theme to why I'm running for Attorney General, I think it's this. It's a choice with boldness or bureaucracy. You've got 4 candidates up here. I think 3 of them are going to be status quo for the bureaucracy. It's going to be good for Helena. I'm the guy that's going to come in, and I'm going to be bold in this town. When I was in the Speaker's office as a Speaker of the House of the State, my name was borderline a swear word in this town. And I wear that very proudly. I don't get invited to a lot of cocktail parties in this town, and I don't think that's going to be the case if I get elected Attorney General. I'm really okay with that. I'm looking to come into this town and shake things up. Things are going to get really exciting in this state in 2020. We're looking down the barrel of getting a new governor. I think we can do some really, really exciting, great things for the state economy and for the state business climate, given the right leadership. And I'm really, really excited to come in here and be a part of that and roll back some regulations, change some stuff, and make this a really business-friendly state. But it's going to take some boldness. It's not going to take status quo. So I think if that's my pitch to you today, let's vote for some boldness.
Thank you, Austin. Raph.
Thank you all again for taking the time to meet with us today. And it really is a pleasure to meet so many new people and see so many familiar faces that I've gotten to work with in this capacity in the last couple years. One thing I want you to know about me that we didn't talk about is back 14 years ago, I was a kid from Great Falls going to school in New York City. What I chose to do with my free time was I actually joined the New York City Police Department as an auxiliary officer because I cared about my community. And I put on a blue uniform once a week and I walked around my precinct up in North Harlem because I cared about what was going on 15, 20 blocks north of my school. I've taken that same attitude of investing myself in my community, back from New York, back to Montana, where I lived in Billings, and now in Helena, where I have the pleasure of serving you, the public, as the governor's lawyer. And again, from what I said at the beginning, as you think about this job, and you think about who you're going to vote for, you're hiring a lawyer. So think about the set of experiences you want in the person you're going to hire, and about what their record actually is. I am not a politician. This is my first run for office ever. I'm not looking for a promotion in the political world. I'm running because I love the work. I wake up in the morning for complex, weird legal problems and how to solve them. That's why I'm running for Attorney General, and I would appreciate your support. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Raph. And finally, John.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I think we can all agree that politics is pretty strange, and it's getting stranger in many ways. Politics it's toxic, and it seems to be getting even more toxic. What we need to do is elect people that actually care about the job that they want to do, people with the experience, the judgment, the work ethic, and the record of accomplishment that can't solve everybody's problems, but can focus on those problems that we can all agree are there and where government can play a role. And where government shouldn't be there, then that they stay out of that. And then in other areas where government can actually partner with the business community, with nonprofits and others, collectively address some of those issues. I'm also not a career politician. I didn't just run for another office and I'm looking to jump to another one. I think we have too many people doing that. We need to elect people to jobs that they actually want to do. And I really want to be your Attorney General, and I will work hard day in and day out to make sure that you have an Attorney General that you can be proud of. I ask for your vote. I've never run for anything before, so I don't assume everyone knows who I am. So I look forward to getting out to your areas, your business, and letting people know who I am, my values, and what I bring to the table. I ask for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And thank you, all four candidates. Yeah, this is exciting as a member of the community and as a voter like you to have four highly qualified candidates who have put a lot of thought, a lot of effort into their candidacy. And so just say on behalf of everyone here, regardless of the outcome, thank you for taking the time, putting yourself out, subjecting yourself to the brutality of elections in the modern world. We really appreciate it, and whatever happens, our state will be better off for it. Thank you very much, all four of you.
Well, thank you, David, for moderating that forum, and to all of our candidates, and we hope that the candidates have a safe conclusion to this election season. A lot of driving being done in the depths of winter, so we appreciate your sticking your necks out to put yourselves forward for this position. We have one item on the agenda prior to our break, and that is we're not able to have, because of what's going on in Washington, D.C. right now, Congress in session. We weren't able to have members of our delegation here. However, Congressman Gianforte has written a personalized letter that you'll find in your packet, and we have tape-recorded videotapes of messages by Senator Tester first, I believe, Gary, is that right, Senator Tester? Daines first, and then Senator Tester. So we'll hear their recorded statements that they've taken time to put out, and then we'll have our break. So, Gary?
Well, welcome to Helena, and thank you to the Montana Chamber of Commerce for inviting me to share a few words. Under Republican leadership and President Trump, this economy is booming. We cut taxes, we cut regulations, and it's working. This is about putting more money in the pockets of hardworking Montanans so they can put food on the table and pay the bills. And as your voice in Washington, D.C., I'll always fight for policies that strengthen Montana's communities and expand economic opportunity. I hope you all enjoy the remainder of this event. Thank you, and keep up the great work.
Greetings from the U.S. Senate, and thank you for inviting me to speak with you all today. As we turn the calendar to a new year, it is critically important that we work together to address the challenges that face our state's businesses. Businesses need certainty to survive, and that's why I'm backing the USMCA, because it does just that. It gives much needed certainty to the Montana's farmers and ranchers and Main Street businesses who rely on North America foreign markets. And I'm hopeful we can now turn our attention to the other trade deals around the globe that need it, to bring these disputes to a resolution so Montana's economy can get back on firing on all cylinders. I met with many of you over the past year, and a concern that frequently comes up is the need to improve our state's workforce so that we can stay competitive. That's why we must make a real investment in the next generation. Whether it's studying at one of our great universities or getting hands-on experience in trade schools, students deserve the opportunity to learn the skills that will power their careers. Staying competitive in the 21st century economy will also require an investment in our state's infrastructure. I'll work with anyone to fix our aging roads, bridges, and water systems and internet connectivity. You've been at the forefront of this fight at the state level, and with your help, we can bring that Montana common sense to work in Washington on a comprehensive bipartisan infrastructure bill. And it is critical that we keep fighting to increase access to health care for rural communities and folks across the great state of Montana. I'm concerned by the attacks that we have seen against efforts to expand access to affordable health care for Montanans. I've been proud to support initiatives like Medicaid expansion that have helped improve outcomes for so many, providing affordable coverage to more than 90,000 Montanans that should not be put at risk. This will help employers and employees. And I'll continue to stand up for rural hospitals that folks across our state depend on to survive. If rural hospitals shut down and leave town, you can bet that the folks who depend on that hospital won't be far behind. I look forward to working with you to make sure Montana's economy continues to thrive. Thanks again, and it is an honor to serve you in the United States Senate. Please keep in touch.
All right, well, I think that was a terrific start to our 2020 Chamber Days at the Capitol. What a great forum, and I hope all of you can agree that this is the sort of thing that will, I think, supersede and go further than we've been able to go in the past, where we've had this sort of thing, but it's been in the cloister of the board of the Chamber as opposed to getting out to the members of the Chamber where folks can make their own minds up. So we're very excited about the future and thought that was a great forum. Again, thank you, David Bell, for moderating. Well, right now we have our networking break, and I believe until 2:30. Is that right, Bridger? So, to what? 2:30. So please be back here at 2:30. Thank you.